Posted by UA Scary Moth. What is your personal encounter with the paranormal, ghosts, aliens, sleep paralysis, glitch in the matrix, etc.? Not me but my dad. He grew up in a small village in Greece. One day on his walk home it was storming quite heavily. He was standing under a tree in an attempt to wait it out. As he's waiting, he's approached by a slow old woman who he'd never seen before. She had an umbrella in one hand and a walking stick in the other. She asks him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm waiting out the storm so I can go home. I don't want to catch a cold." She tells him, "You have a long life ahead of you. I would risk catching a cold if I were you." And with that, she starts to slowly walk down the street and out of sight. My dad waits for a few more minutes and takes her advice. He starts walking home. A few more minutes pass and he hears an explosion. He turns around and sees the tree he was waiting under was hit by lightning and blew up. Frightened, he runs to his home, hoping to bump into the old woman to thank her, but he never saw her again after that encounter. He's convinced she was a paranormal being since he never caught up to her that night, even though she was so slow. He had never seen her in the village before or after that moment, and no one knew who he was referring to when asking around for her. My wife of 22 years died earlier this year. She was every bit the happy homemaker. Every day after I went to work and she would make our bed like a soldier in basic training. It had to be just perfect, including the massive pile of throw pillows we had to unload every night and stack on a small couch in our room. During the last few months when she became bed-bound, I of course had to take over all the cleaning duties, which did not include a daily making of the bed. So the pillows remained stacked on the couch for months without moving. The night she died I was awoken by the sound of a fan in our room being knocked over. I turned on the light and the pile of throw pillows, which had not moved in months, fell into the floor and knocked over the fan that was about 2 feet away from the couch. I piled them up back on the couch and got back into bed. I checked the time to see how long I had been asleep. It was 2:12 in the morning. My wife's is February 12th. I have so many stories about this. My whole town is haunted, so haunted that town hall hired an investigation crew to come live here, and then dedicated an entire section in our library to the town's paranormal activity. My favorite, and most terrifying story is about the fog monsters. We get this Silent Hill-esque fog every now and then, and according to local legend, the silhouettes of figures can be seen when peering into the fog. Most people recount seeing the silhouettes of children and young adults believed to be settlers from the 1700s. There are these two figures in particular though that earn their own stories. One of them is a quadrupedal hound. They're massive, easily 6 feet tall, standing on all fours. The other seems to be a little girl, but what's notable about her is that only her dress really seems visible. Like you can make out her shape and outline just fine, but looking directly at her limbs or face seemingly makes them disappear while the floating dress stays. Although these figures seem dangerous, there hasn't been any reports of them actually hurting people. In my experience, they actually led me home when I was lost one day. I wasn't near them, but there's like a wave of fear that comes over you when you see them, that just screams go the other way. While I was lost, they seemed to group up and completely block off the roads, standing still, just staring at me. I got home by just going down whichever roads they weren't on. So in a sense, they seem pretty benevolent, but they might just have a strong sense of community, as I do live where they did. Back to the two special figures though, there's a legend of the girl visiting you in your dreams. Mostly appearing in the dreams of children, she beckons you into the woods to play with her. When you wake up, you get a strong urge to go back to the place she takes you in your dream, but apparently, nobody who returned to the woods while awake has returned. A lot of people who dreamed of her reported that they've seen her commune with animals, and has sometimes been seen with the quadruped. That leads me to believe that the quadruped is actually this lady's pet. Maybe not, but it's in my head canon for these guys. But these aren't what all the stories here are about. As an example, we have trails out in our woods for four-wheeling and dirt bikes. Sometimes while walking down one, the path straightens where it shouldn't and eventually leads to an opening in the woods. In the opening is a small cabin, a garden, and a sort of berry farm. Like the kind that's in a dugout pit and gets filled with water for an easy harvest. Legend says that a witch lives in the cabin, but the place is difficult to find. As a child, I tried mapping out all of the woods here to find it, but I've only ever been there twice, and both times were by accident. Anyway, this is from the town of Chester, New Hampshire. I can't say for certain that you'll encounter anything if you come here, but almost all of the residents have. Check out the library sometime if you're in the neighborhood. I have a few, as my late mother firmly believed my childhood house was haunted. Apparently before I was born, and my parents bought the house, there was a fire in the attic that caused a teen boy to die from smoke inhalation in his sleep. This was why my parents got the house at a good price. Growing up, my mom claimed to be sensitive, and though I dismissed her a lot, there's still a few things even I can't explain. My mom had a small knick-knack table in the living room. Once, rounding a corner, she lightly touched a snow globe on the table, absent-mindedly, and the snow globe exploded. Not broke, not fell, not cracked. Exploded. There were tiny shards of glass all over the carpet. I saw the whole thing happen as I was sitting in the room, and my mom and I instantly locked eyes. Remote thief. While some of these incidents are probably just human error, one time sticks out. We were sitting on the couch watching TV. We were flicking between two channels to avoid commercials. Suddenly the remote is gone. We tore the house apart for almost 2 hours and found it in the back of the bottom cupboard behind the garbage can, one we rarely use. We always joke we had a poltergeist hiding the TV remote on us. We had lots of cats growing up. One time there were no indoor cats and I was sleeping. I distinctly felt cat paws climbing up my legs and settling down. I was half asleep and didn't even think about not having a cat at the time. Only in the morning did I realize, because it felt as real as any earthly sensation. Light bulbs shattering / flickering / popping when my mother was near. Probably a coincidence most of the time, but it got the point where my dad kept backups in plenty and it was somehow always her that it happened around. This also became a family joke, to the point where my mom would wiggle her fingers at us and swear she was a witch. Attic noises. There was the usual moans and groans a house makes, but the sound of feet climbing a metal ladder is a very specific sound that would happen on the odd occasion at 3 a.m. My dad would be on night shift and my mom slept on the main floor, so in my tiny bungalow it was pretty obvious who was where. The door to my room was under the ladder to the attic, and I used to jump the 3 steps in a hurry because I always got the creepiest feelings under that ladder. Some nights I slept with my mom until I was like 17 if I heard the noise. My mom claimed she saw things, but I never did, so I can't confirm there. She has since passed and promised me she would always haunt me. So far no sign of her, so I'm a little disappointed. Still waiting for you to hide the remote on me, Mom. One night I was going to sleep and all of a sudden I start sweating profusely. I try to get up and turn on the AC and I could not move from my bed. I was confused and a bit scared. I tried to shout to my sister in the next room over. I couldn't talk either. At this point is when I saw a dark figure in the corner watching me. It felt like years until the silence broke. It muttered in a distorted voice, "You are not safe." At this point I could hear my heart pounding like it was in my ear. Next thing I knew, the figure moved across the room and to the foot of my bed. It stared into my soul and then I could move. I was soaked in sweat, and that night I did not sleep. To this day I have never had sleep paralysis after that, and I still wonder, am I really safe? I pissed off a ghost at my old job. Short version, was told the carousel was haunted and didn't believe them. One night, the maintenance door was open after I emptied the ride of guests, and my second insisted they hadn't opened it. Closed it, loaded guests, and it was open again. It has a turn latch that you put a padlock on, so it could only be opened intentionally. I went inside, the center of the carousel. Mostly just the breaker and all the mechanical parts in there, and switched on the light to check for a maintenance guy that hadn't talked to me. Empty. I'm a little spooked, so I say loudly, I'm not dealing with this shit tonight. We got 1 hour left, so get your act together. In my mom voice. Do safety checks, start the ride. Phone rings, and when I answer, there's no one in the other end. A few minutes later, it happens again. After I hang up, I call base to tell them something's wrong with the phone. Supervisor calls back, says sometimes the phone rings randomly, don't worry about it. I recant the tale to a coworker and she looks at me funny. Did you turn the lights off before the music? No, I need the lights to get to the switch. Oh, well, make sure you never do, and if the phone rings after that, don't answer, just leave. I figure it's some kind of electrical short that causes it, and go home. In the following days I keep THJNKJNG. I see it move out of the corner of my eye, or hear it running after I've closed for the night, but shake it off as I was working 15-hour days continuously. The next time I open the carousel, we took turns. I go to take a potty break and I come back to the security guard standing next to my ride. I saw him while you were gone, just be careful. He says to me, what are you talking about? The ride op? The one that tries to grab operators. I try to think which of my coworkers is that rude. He then goes on to explain that one of the 3 park ghosts is attached to the carousel, and he's the only mean one. He tries to grab operators and causes bad luck and ride malfunctions. Apparently, I made him mad by yelling at him and he decided to haunt TF out of me. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was on my way to Home Depot, when I arrive at this stoplight. After sitting there about 15 or so seconds, the light turns green. As soon as it did, I felt like I couldn't move at all. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like if something was telling me to not go just yet. After about a second or two, this red Ford Explorer barrels through the intersection, running the red at what must have been about 50 miles per hour. I'd count much exactly, but it went ridiculously fast. After the car sped through the intersection, I could move again. I don't know what that something was, but had it not been for that I would have probably not been able to tell you all this little story. This is more glitch in the Matrix maybe? Years ago, I went to a friend's Halloween party, and right after walking in the door I saw this guy across the room, immediately recognized him, and thought OMG. I haven't seen you in years. Waved in excitement, and he did too with the same fervor. After I made my way across the room and we began talking, I slowly realized that I wasn't sure I knew him. As we both tried to figure out where we had met each other, we realized we had never met and didn't have any friends in common. He was at the party somewhat randomly through an acquaintance. I thought it was just me with this feeling, but he swore he knew me too. After chatting for a bit, that feeling faded and I had no feeling of familiarity anymore. Even typing this story out doesn't do the feeling justice. It was so strong, like revisiting a place you've spent a lot of time but haven't seen in a long time. Anyways, we figured out we didn't know each other, had never met, and were both somehow mistaken. I figure we must have been best friends or lovers in another life. I'm not really sure I really believe in past lives, but it was such a strong feeling that I've never felt with anyone else and doubt I'll ever feel again and cannot explain it all. Anyone else have this happen? I don't believe in ghosts or paranormal connections and shit, but this one really baffles me to this day. Happened a couple of years back and I still can't forget it. Warning, story is kind of a downer. Also, sorry that it's long, but this is about as condensed as I could get it. Most of my friends have had trouble with substance abuse throughout their lives, just the crowd I hung around with I guess. Around the time of this story, one of my closest friends was clean off H for the longest they had ever been, a couple of months, but still fantastic progress for him, and things were looking good. We were hanging out one day and he gave me some great news. Since middle school he and his mom had been fighting for a medical malpractice lawsuit that happened to him when he was younger and they won. He got something like $10-15K out of the deal. So most of what we talked about that day was just how he was going to buy his mom something nice, and how he was going to use that money to finally go to college. I honestly hadn't seen him that happy in years and it was great. A day or two later I was sleeping like normal when all of a sudden I woke up at around 1 o'clock in the morning. I felt great, in fact I felt absolutely euphoric. I felt like I was laying in the sun on the most beautiful summer's day in a puddle of 1,000 puppies, and that was just the first second. The next second was that X1000. And the next second that X1000 as well. Within moments however, I went from this is pretty nice, to oh shit something is seriously wrong, before blacking out. All of a sudden I was walking down the stairs to my friend's basement. It was absolutely destroyed with shit thrown everywhere, and empty bottles and syringes laying around. He was sitting there waiting for me on the couch with tears in his eyes. He just kept repeating that he was sorry and that he didn't want to hurt anyone. He said the money didn't last him long and he's back to being his broke-ass self, that he was sorry for bringing me there, and that he just needed to say goodbye to someone, before finally saying goodbye to me and everything fading out in another wave of euphoria. Me being logical to a fault and pretty straightforward, I woke up the next morning thinking damn, what a weird dream, but not much else of it, wrote it down in a dream journal I was doing at the time, and completely forgot about it. Ended up going to work and class like normal, then a couple hours later my friend's mom called. She called me to break the news that my friend had passed away that night. Overdose. It wasn't until a couple of months later when another friend of mine, also ex-addict, was trying to console me by telling me how he went out with no pain, and how it was probably the best way to go when things started to get really weird. He started to explain to me what an overdose actually feels like, the overwhelming euphoria, and how it's impossible to explain to someone who's never experienced it before, me. It was then that what he was describing started to sound really familiar and I went to my phone, opened my dream journal and started reading the entry from a couple months back to him out loud. He pretty much said yeah, exactly that. Where'd you get that story? And told him the whole thing. Both of us were at a loss for words, and I still am. As I said, I don't believe in this stuff, and if someone told me this story I would say they were high as fuck, but it's a memory that I will never forget. My mum's experience with what she thinks was a ghost. She went outside around 10 p.m. for a cigarette years ago and saw a very elderly woman walking up our neighbor's back stairs to their veranda. Mum said she wanted to ask if she was alright. It was very rare for our neighbors to have visitors that late, they were also elderly, but Mum said she completely lost her voice and felt stunned, though she couldn't look away. She ended up getting out a hello and the woman just disappeared. The next morning Mum made a joke to our neighbors asking why she wasn't invited over for their nightcap with their visitor, and they very casually replied, "Oh, so you've now seen our ghost too?" They were excited over it and not at all scared. Barry, neighbor, says an elderly lady follows Elwin, his wife, everywhere, and they feel pure comfort around her, but their own children and grandchildren are frightened by the lady on the stairs when they stay. I think I lived in a haunted dorm room. My roommate and I kind of assumed the previous tenants were joking when they said they summoned a ghost, but it felt like bizarre, unexplainable nonsense was constantly happening in that room. About once a week, we would both wake up from a dead sleep at the same time, usually 3:06 a.m., and both our phones would be glowing, or the radio and the TV would turn on simultaneously. One night we were laying in bed and everything on top of my roommate's wardrobe fell to the floor. Our toilet water turned red one day and stayed black for like 2 months, then went back to normal. It was never clogged and kept working just fine, it just looked really off-putting. When we were showering, the shower curtain would get yanked open. Over spring break, I was one of maybe 12 people staying on campus. I woke up one night to loud snoring coming from my roommate's empty bed. I laid as still as I could for what felt like forever until it finally grew quieter and quieter, terrified of what would happen or what I would see if I rolled over. It was constant, and always felt creepy and slightly malicious, like the ghost was just fucking with us. One afternoon though, that changed. I'm not a napper, like at all, but that day I just really needed a nap. I curled up under a blanket at the foot of my bed facing the door. At some point, I very groggily woke up and could tell someone was in the room, watching me. I was scared at first, but when I opened my eyes, I saw the vague outline of my grandpa standing in the doorway. It was like a wave of relief. I felt so safe and comforted by his presence. That semester was really challenging for me, but it felt like he was checking in to make sure I knew I would be okay. I've never shared that with anyone, because I just knew it was him. There wasn't like cool concrete proof or anything. But all the weird shit from our other ghosty friends stopped after that. When I was 19 or so, I had moved into my first apartment alone. I got all my furniture from the thrift store next door. They were pretty good finds too. My favorite was a pair of red armchairs that I'd often fall asleep in while reading. One night I woke up and there was a little girl sitting in the chair across from me. My lights were still on as I had fallen asleep reading, and I could move around, so I don't think it was sleep paralysis. She started playing peekaboo, and so I played back. When I removed my hands after the third time, she was gone. I did have sleep paralysis at least 3 times a week in that apartment, but it was nothing like that night playing peekaboo. One day I was alone in the backyard at my boyfriend's house, swinging on the porch swing, when I saw his black lab slowly walking towards me. Eventually she made her way to me and sat down right in front of my legs, so I stopped swinging. She looked me in the eyes, and all of a sudden I got this overwhelming feeling that she was going to die. She seemed sad, a little scared and confused. I got the feeling that she needed comfort and reassurance, so I sat there with her and stroked her ears and fur. Telling her how good she was, and that everything would be okay. Telling her that she was loved and to not be afraid. After a few minutes she seemed to feel better and began to wander off again. I told my boyfriend that he needed to pet his girl and give her kisses, and he did. I didn't fill him in on my experience with her just moments before. The next day he called me crying. His mother had accidentally ran over his dog when she was backing out of the garage, and unfortunately she was so injured that they decided to put her down. This isn't the first time this kind of thing happened to me, and it has happened to me with people too. I don't know why I can sense others' death and don't really know what to do with this kind of info. His dog's death struck a chord with me though, because she was young and healthy and she sensed her death coming too. Most animals and people are surprised by their endings, that I have witnessed anyway. I posted this a while back, but here's my encounter. Happened when I was in my mid-late teens. It was a Friday evening, maybe about 6 p.m. I was walking my dog through the woods. I was wearing headphones. I used to walk her all the time on this route, so no reason to be afraid. It was very rare to see anyone else walking at this time of day on a Friday, actually why I had chosen to walk her then, and I'm coming down through this field/valley, when all of a sudden I start to feel on edge. The feeling just kept getting worse, so I turned off my iPod and took my headphones out. I was half jogging by the time I got to the bottom of this field. My dog had taken off way ahead of me at this point. I squeezed through a hole in the fence and onto the dirt path surrounded by trees, took the usual right, and kept checking behind me. Well, here's the horrifying part. I keep turning around to check if anyone's behind me, and I see a someone, or some shadow-like figure, which is more what this looked like, flick from behind one tree to behind another, bigger oak tree. I think I audibly yelped at this point, but I kept power walking away, I was still fairly close to whoever/whatever this was, and tiny teenage me knew that I was unlikely to be able to outrun this thing. I kept walking a few more paces before turning around again. This goddamn thing is now standing right in the center of the path, further back near that tree. It has its arms straight down, but out from its sides, its hands were fists, and it was stood with this wide leg stance. I say thing because it looked like the shadow of a man. It looked like it had a cloak and a wide-ish brimmed hat, but the whole figure was completely opaque. It just looked angry, and it's staring right down the path at me. Needless to say, I sprinted home from there and practically had a panic attack when I made it back. No idea what it was, but I know what I saw. This was in the UK, and urban legend about that wood, and that crossroads area in particular, is that they used to hang people back on that oak tree way back when. Whatever the hell it was, it's not something I'll ever forget. Growing up, my sister and I were good friends with our neighbor, Matt, who had a dog, Molly. Molly ran away one day, so the three of us set out into the nature preserve behind our houses to look for her. Matt's brother, Chris, set out separately. In the preserve is an old dam/mill from the 1700s that is rumored to be haunted. When we got to the mill, we saw Chris and the dog on the other side of the river, maybe 30 yards away. "Matt, I got her, I'm bringing her home," Chris yelled. But something didn't feel right, and the three of us gave each other that look. We headed home knowing Chris would be a bit behind us since he'd have to go a mile or two out of his way to cross the bridge. When we got home, there was Matt's mom and the dog. She was under the porch the whole time, she said. A little while later, Chris showed up, having never even gone into that part of the woods. I grew up with a strange mom. We don't really talk anymore. She was a paranormal investigator when I was growing up. There are loads of stories there. When I was about 3, there is video footage of me coming downstairs as angry as could be. Not temper tantrum angry, pissed. In the video, I keep yelling at my mom that they won't let me play with my toys. She tried to ask me who. I just kept angrily telling her that they wouldn't let me play with my toys. We didn't get a cat until I was 4, but before that, there was some kind of cat creature in the house. I had seen it in my mother's closet once. Another time I remember being woken in the middle of the night by a cat yowling in my playroom. The next room over, I could see a shadow under the door before I opened it and heard a hiss. Upon opening the door, there was nothing there. As I got older, things got stranger. After my mother got back from the catfish plantation, strange things started happening. We could hear someone running up and down the stairs at night. Shoes would be thrown down the stairs. My most vivid memory of this time was me sitting on my mom's bed. We had no pets at the time, and it was just me and her. Her bathroom was attached to their bedroom. She was the kind of woman that had 20 almost empty bottles on the side of the tub. While watching Barney one day, it sounded as if someone had stuck their arm out and just swiped all the bottles into the tub at once. My mother came around the corner yelling, "Jeremy." Turned out Jeremy was the name of a young man who was a slave at the plantation she had visited. He had fallen off the back of a hay wagon and died. After that day, she got back in her car and drove back to the plantation, and all of the strange happenings stopped. Also, now she believes she's an alien. So, that's a whole other story. Lol. Before my grandpa passed away, he had always been telling us how after he had died, he would appear to us in his white clothes and watch over us. He passed away from cancer when I was 8. The years passed and I was a very unhappy kid, undiagnosed autism, sexual assault victim, so at age 14 I tried to hang myself. It failed, thank God. As I was drifting away, my grandpa's image appeared to me and told me this wasn't my time to go yet and begged me to wake up. I did wake, lying on my bedroom floor, and I ran downstairs to my mom, crying, telling her what I had done. She went upstairs shortly after to clean up the ropes and told me much later that it looked as if they had been cut clean with a knife. After that traumatic event, I began seeing things, puffs of mist outside in front of my bedroom window. When I was 16 was the first time I actually did see that it was my grandpa, just floating in front of my window. I tried to talk to him a few times. I asked him why he couldn't come inside. He responded that he couldn't, because my mom had asked him not to. We spoke about a few things on occasion. When he mentioned the day where I tried to take my own life, he told me he tried to save me by cutting the rope and then went to check on me a few times. One time, my younger brother apparently saw him slip into my bedroom and got scared, after which my mother apparently went upstairs, asked my grandpa that if he was there to please not come in anymore as he was scaring her son. I decided to tell my mom about all this and took her out for dinner, told her everything. She was shocked and amazed and confirmed that she did tell her father to not come inside and that was why he stayed outside. I'm just glad she believed me. I have since had more traumatic experiences with the paranormal and have shut myself off to their influences, but I still remember the events with my grandpa vividly.